Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Nick DiMartino. That's Anthony Balester. That's Johnny Montalbano. This is another episode of Forever Power 5. You can follow us on Twitter, Twitter and Instagram on @FP5. I'm sorry. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram @FP5ETB. You can follow us on TikTok @ForeverPower5. You can follow and you can find us on Facebook, Forever Power 5. You can follow me on Twitter @Nick DiMart, Balester @Balester555, and you can follow Johnny @Montalbano NY. And you can follow Zan on Twitter @ZanBando99, and same on Instagram. You can follow this network, @ETB Network, on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and Empty the Bench Network on Facebook. And you can find all Empty the Bench. You can watch all Empty the Bench shows on youtube.com/ETB Network. You can listen to all Empty the Bench podcasts on etbpodcast.com. And you can listen to Forever Power 5 wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, this show, Forever Power 5, is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. Okay, so there's a lot to get to today, specifically in the SEC. It looked a little bit like Texas had a bit of a welcome to the SEC rookie game against Georgia. Georgia, especially in the first half, Texas was bad in the first half, real bad. And Georgia showing they still kind of have it. Georgia showing they still kind of have it, even though they've fallen off a little offensively, specifically. My takeaway from this is it almost looked like Texas. It almost looked like too big of a stage for Texas. Texas was the number one team in the country, which I also think this sort of proves that like rankings of teams early in the season is so difficult to do because they're not playing the same matchups. Like Texas was never tested like Ohio State was or Alabama was. Or not that it was unjustified for them to be the number one team, but they just were never tested. And to me, it's like I also think that all of these teams that have moved, so many of these teams that have moved conferences, that have moved up to tougher conferences, they've been pretty bad after moving into those conferences, it seems like. The only one that hasn't, I think, is probably Oregon, who's been very good in the Big Ten. Other than that, everybody else has struggled, it seems like. I don't know. I mean, there's so much about this game that we can get to. I just want to get your guys' reactions to this.
Yeah, I said last week that I thought Georgia was going to win. I said that they were going to come in this game and they were going to have more to fight for. Already having that one loss and, kind of being embarrassed by Alabama, they weren't going to go down 2 games. And it did seem like they were the team that wanted this game more. It seemed like they were more pumped up and more ready to go, and particularly on defense. Carson Beck didn't do this Georgia team any favors. He was turning the ball over. The offense was pretty much carried by the running back Etienne. He had a great game. But defensively, Jalen Walker, he had to be the MVP of the game. He was all over the field, giving Quinn Ewers problems. Mikael Williams, the other edge rusher, was giving them problems. So I don't think it mattered what team they played that night, what quarterback you put in there for Texas. Georgia was going to win that night. That was their game. But it does give you questions about Texas. I said coming into this game, they haven't really been tested, and we haven't seen them go up against stiff competition. Now that we have, this gives us questions. Can Quinn Ewers really perform against elite talent? Can this defense, hold up against the better offenses in the country? It's going to be a question that we're going to have to see. Both teams will probably still end up making the playoffs. I don't have no question about that. I think Quinn Ewers and the defense will respond. But it definitely gives you questions, and maybe they're not the number one team and the dominant team like we once thought. One last thing I want to say is, what about that pass interference call that was reversed? It looked like it wasn't a pass interference call, but they did call it, and the Texas fans just started going crazy. They were throwing bottles and throwing anything they had in their hands all over the field, and it got pretty intense, and even head coach for Texas, Sarkisian had to go in there and, calm all them down. And I guess they're going to get fined over it. And they ended up reversing the call after all. And that was pretty insane. I'm not sure if you guys any thoughts about that.
Well, yeah, I'll take that one here first, Anthony. First of all, I saw that in real time. At the bare minimum, they should both have gotten a penalty. Those should have been it should have been offsetting penalties at the bare minimum.
At the very worst. At the very worst.
At least. But that was one of the worst calls I could see, and I don't care how bad it was. I mean, the reaction from the fans, and you saw that they did come down with like a $250,000 fine for that. It was a terrible showing there by the Texas fans. In regards to that call. I mean, it was a terrible call, don't get me wrong. But I thought, at the same time, how do you go back and overturn it, though? Isn't that weird, though, too, that they have to, the officials have to come together and think about it, and then they overturn it, which is like, that also was kind of suspect in my eyes, too, as far as that, because that's something you take out of this game. Now, as far as my thoughts about this game, you guys both said it, too. I'm going to kind of piggyback off both of you on what you were saying. The one thing I would add, though, to it is Georgia's defense to me has never been a question mark. I mean, if you look at their season so far this year, they've had one really bad half, and that was against Alabama. I mean, they settled down in the second half. I know Bama made some great clutch plays in the fourth quarter of that game. I mean, an unbelievable catch and run by Williams there in that fourth quarter of that game. But, I mean, Georgia's defense to me has never been a question mark. But you know what? After going through this game and watching it a couple of times and really studying it, to me, I'm still have concerns about Georgia's offense because, Carson Beck, threw 3 interceptions in that first half. But what really bailed him out was the Georgia defense because the Texas offense was not able to capitalize on that. Ewers did not look good. You saw he took a big hit, which we saw Arch Manning then having to come in. So, to me, the Bulldogs defense never been a concern. I think you take out that they are still that powerhouse defense. I still have concerns about their offense, but to me, Georgia's defense is going to always give them a chance in these games. And I think it showed that. And you know what? I think the disrespect, they definitely felt that too. You saw Kirby Smart after the game to tell ESPN about that. And you also noticed too, this was the first time in the last 50 games that the Bulldogs entered as an underdog. And so I think they definitely took that personally. And as I said, I think their defense is still very, very dangerous. And it just goes to show you though, that Kirby Smart, I still believe, is the best coach in college football. And that school, what they're able to do year in and year out, losing so many players to the NFL draft and having to scout properly and replace those guys, it's quite a remarkable thing. But, Georgia's still up there, and they will be for the entire season again.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring that up because I was gonna bring some of that up too. Carson Beck did not play a good game. He threw 0 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. How many teams, honestly, and imagine just even if you go to the NFL or something, how many NFL or college teams could have their quarterback go 0-3 for touchdowns and interceptions and throw for under 200 yards and still win the game?
Not many. Maybe
how many?
More likely. But
how often does that happen? I mean, unless it's like 2 third-string quarterbacks because everybody's injured or something like that. Like that almost never happens. You might look at this game and think like Texas's defense got killed by Georgia's offense, but that's not true at all. Texas's defense played very, very well. Georgia's offense totally stunk. Like it wasn't. Not only was it like not great, it wasn't good at all. But what happened was, it was basically below average. But what happened was Georgia had amazing field position every time they got the ball. Yeah. They had amazing field position. They were almost always in Texas territory. So they didn't have to do much to actually score a bunch of points. The truth is, the MVP for Georgia's offense was not Carson Beck or Trevor Etienne or anybody other than Georgia's defense. That's really who the MVP was for that game. And also Texas just made in the first half, they made a lot of really dumb mistakes. Turning the ball over in their own territory, and Georgia just took advantage of that. Georgia, nobody plays the disrespect card quite as good as Kirby Smart. Nobody pulls that better than Kirby Smart. And Kirby Smart is an amazing head coach, probably the best head coach in college football right now. And I think a lot of this game had a lot to do with coaching. I really do. Georgia's the type of team where it's like, You look at a lot of teams in college football that are sort of second tier, that are very good, but not as good as a team like Georgia, where they win a lot of games. They might go 9-3, 10-2, whatever, but everything's got to be right. You know what I mean? Everything's got to be right for them to beat good teams. Quarterback's got to play well. Defense has to hold up. Wide receivers have to have good games. You know, everything has to be right. Whereas Georgia, things don't have to be right. They can be uncomfortable. Carson Beck doesn't have to play a good game in order for them to win, which is a huge deal. I mean, that's really big. I mean, there's no way Jalen Milroe can throw 3 interceptions in a game and Alabama wins. Right. There's no way that can happen. Georgia, they can do that on the road against the number 1 team in the country. So to me, that is just very telling to me. As far as the officiating and that call, it was like, I saw the play and I was just like, I saw the replay and I was like, wait, where was the hold? I didn't see it. The officiating in college football this year has been awful. It's been terrible. They're making horrible calls. And yeah, I agree with what both of you said about, I mean, it was a terrible call. I don't know how you make that call. The flip side is it's not good when fans are throwing things on the field. As a result, you pause the game and then you say, all right, we're going to reverse the call. What exactly are you rewarding and incentivizing for the future? I mean, like, what are other fan bases going to look at when they see this and say, oh, look, you were able to get a call overturned if we just throw a bunch of water bottles on the field. And I was just, the flip side is, you were saying, how do you overturn the call? Part of me says, though, how do you not? How do you not? Like, they're looking at that. I'm not saying they did the right thing. I'm just saying, how do you not, in the sense that, like, they made a call, the refs looked at the screen, and they were like, oh, no, that is such a bad call. And then fans are throwing things on the field. They have time to get together and discuss it. It's very hard not to overturn it in that moment. Like, I understand why the refs did it completely, because they're just like, in this moment, we really want to not be blamed. And we just want to, like, you know, correct the mistake that we made, is probably what their mindset was.
I think the other part is, too, they don't want to worry about, you know, more objects being thrown on the field and possibly injuring players or staff members or something like that, too. I mean, we saw that long delay, like you said there, but
yeah.
It was an ugly scene there, but I think bottom line we take out of this is that the Georgia defense is still very, very dangerous. Now, the flip side to that would be, you saw what they did in the first half against Alabama, and that's where I still have a little bit of concern with Georgia going forward here, is if Carson Beck continues to have kind of these off games, then if their defense flounders for a half or so, it's going to put them in a bit of a hole as Georgia tries to become as Georgia tries to win their 3rd title in 4 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I was just about to ask you guys that. Now, obviously the defense could muster a performance up like this, you know, maybe 1 or 2 weeks in a row. But now in this 12-team playoffs, where they're going to have to probably play 3 or 4 potential games, depending on if they get the bye or not. You know, if Carson Beck is playing this bad, can the defense play a performance like this 2 or 3 games in a row to get in the national championship? I'm not sure. I feel like at some point in the playoffs, there's going to have to be a game or a play where Carson Beck's going to have to make a throw and help them win this game. I understand maybe Georgia has been carried by their defense over the years, and a lot of people want to disrespect Stetson Bennett. But when they needed to play on their offense, Stetson Bennett made it, whether if it was with his legs or with his arm. He was clutch, and he made a lot of plays in a lot of big game moments. And we've seen now that Carson Beck has lost Brock Bowers, the lad McClonkley, he has no game. He has no options to throw to, and he can't carry this offense whatsoever. So I feel like this might come back to haunt them in the playoffs, where when they need to play and maybe their defense can't carry them and be Superman, they're going to need to drive by Carson Beck. And if Carson Beck can't deliver, they're not going to be able to win the championship this year.
Yeah, Anthony, it happened last year. I mean, look, that they played bad against Alabama, and it cost them because they didn't even make the college football playoff last year. I mean, now it's different this year in the 12-team playoff, but I mean, with everything that happened last year, and you know they were playing perfect up until they played Alabama, and as a result of that, they didn't even make the college football playoff. So I think you saw it affected them last year.
Yeah, I mean, well, to that point, I get what you're saying, and I don't disagree. Although I don't think Carson Beck is going to play as bad as he did against Texas 3 games in a row or anything like. I don't think that's going to be a stretch that's going to happen when the playoffs. I mean, it could happen, but I don't think it will. I think in reality he'll play somewhere in the middle between his best and his worst. And against Texas on the road against the number 1 team in the country, he was at his worst. And Georgia still beat them pretty handily. So I also view it in the sense that, like, all right, Carson Beck was kind of at his worst in this game and didn't have to do much on the road against the number 1 team in the country, and Georgia still beat them pretty handily. I also think that's a very good sign. I mean, I don't think Georgia has fully recovered from not losing Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey. Like they just don't have the playmakers on the outside that they once had. They don't have the ability to make explosive plays like they once did. And that is all a concern, obviously. But to me, it's just like the way I see this game is, look, Carson Beck was at his worst, and they were still able to beat Texas pretty well on the road. Just everything was, the deck was stacked against them, is how I would put it. The deck this season is stacked against Georgia because their schedule is just so difficult. Yeah. And they were still able to win by 2 scores. I mean, Carson Beck's not going to be this bad every game. He just isn't. And if he's maybe, like, imagine if he was moderately, if he had an average game for Carson Beck, how much they would have won by. And this is against Texas on the road. But like, to me, it's like, I don't know. I think this is a pretty good sign. I mean, as far as the Alabama game goes, I think that they just ran out of time. That's really all it was. I think if they get a rematch, they play again. I feel like I think Georgia wins.
Yeah, maybe time and energy too, because they had spent so much energy just coming back in that game in the second half, and then they just completely lost it late against them too. Well, by the way, he's got 8 interceptions, by the way, so far this year, Beck, and he had 6 all last year. Yeah. I know 5 in the last 2 weeks and 6 in 2 games, if you want to look at it that way. But we'll see. But yeah, that defense still, that's the big takeaway from this. And Texas, a reality check, and I'll be curious to see what they do going into next weekend's Vandy, which I know we'll pick later on in the show. Yeah.
They were just they dug themselves in such a hole in the first half that they really just couldn't afford. Is really just what happened. I want to move on. Tennessee beats Alabama 24-17. I'm not an Alabama fan. I did watch this game, and this is just so. Here's my takeaway from. I think Alabama and Tennessee are both very similar this year. They've both been bad on one side of the ball consistently. I guess is how I would put it. They're both they both struggle in sort of hostile road environments. To me, Alabama is not like Georgia. Georgia can overcome the circumstances basically, but Alabama this year is more like, all right, Jalen Milroe's got to be great. Our whole offense has to be great. Defense probably not going to be great. Everything kind of has to, the Ducks all kind of have to be in a row for Alabama to win, it seems like. And the other thing is with Alabama, like they've been bad on the road. They've been bad as a road team. And the other thing is they are so bad in the second half. Alabama had no business losing that game. Tennessee's offense didn't come alive until within 2 minutes left of the third quarter. When Tennessee's offense finally came alive, Tennessee's offense was dead all of their SEC matchups. Their offense didn't look good at all since they played in the SEC. Tennessee's offense looked terrible against Oklahoma, which I chalked up to Oklahoma having just a very good defense. All right, but they looked bad against Arkansas in the game that they lost. They looked bad against Florida, who took them to overtime. And they looked bad for almost 3 quarters against Alabama. And then they finally come alive late in the third quarter. And that was it for Alabama. That was just it.
Yeah, it's not looking good right now in Tuscaloosa. And as an Alabama fan, I'm not sure we're even going to make the playoffs at this point. That was a tough loss. We know the defense for Alabama has been struggling this year, but I feel like lately, the last couple of weeks, the offense has struggled. Now, I know South Carolina has a good defense, and we know Tennessee's got to have one of the best defense in all of college football. I mean, we've seen that pass rush with James Pierce Jr., Bailey, Josephs. They got like 3 good pass rushers. McCoy, the corner, is a shutdown corner. So this defense has really carried them. But Jalen Milroe hasn't been good that last 2 weeks, and I feel like teams are starting to figure out the blueprint on Jalen Milroe. If you got an athletic defense, you put a quarterback spy on him to take away the running game, and then you take away the deep ball. If you take away the deep ball and you take away his running ability, he can't really kill you and beat you too much in the intermediate and the short-term passing game. And I feel like the combination of that and their defense struggling is the reason why this is Alabama team might be outside the playoffs. Particularly in the fourth quarter, it was devastating. I feel like even though we struggled all season, I feel like Alabama's defense allowed Nico Iamaleava to look like a good quarterback in the fourth quarter. I mean, I feel like he was the better quarterback late in that game. And also, they didn't have an answer for Dylan Sampson. Dylan Sampson had a great game for Tennessee, and he's been kind of carrying this offense and the lack of this passing game. But for Alabama, man, it looks like coaching could be an issue as well. Looks like Kalen DeBoer doesn't have this team as disciplined or as buttoned up as they used to be. And I'm not sure how far Tennessee could go on their end. Their defense could only carry them so much. They're kind of like a worse Georgia. I feel like their offense is worse than Georgia, but their defense has just been carrying them. I'm not sure how far that could get them. But for Alabama, man, it's going to be tough, and it's probably going to be a year where they find themselves outside the playoffs, and that's not something we're used to as an Alabama fan.
No, I was telling you guys before we started, imagine if we were back to the 14 playoff and, Bama wouldn't be discussed in the playoff. Now, that being said, they're going to have to run the table here, I think, just to have a chance, because I think right now with a 12-team playoff, 3 losses is guaranteed out, where like if you were in the regular 4-team or 2 losses and you'd be out. But it's not even just that. I mean, even for both of these teams, if you just go back and look at them these last couple of weeks here, Bama's lost, obviously that probably the upset of the year against Vanderbilt. They really struggled with South Carolina. And then obviously what happened this past week with Tennessee. And then Tennessee came in, they were upset by Arkansas. They had their hands full with Florida at home the week prior. So both teams entered struggles. But, Jalen Milroe to me, guys, is maybe the toughest. And it's not a reach to say this. He might be the toughest player to figure out in college football, because remember him last year when he took over for Bryce Young, how he gets benched, how he has, he struggles a lot. And then he makes and then at the same time, though, he has games where he makes some unbelievable throws, like that 4th and goal from forever against Auburn. He has some moments like, he has the unbelievable game against Georgia, but then he has clunkers like this. So he is such a tough player to figure out here. I know there are experts that thinking he might be a high draft pick in the NFL. I don't see that at all. But I think he's going to, as far as Bama go, he's going to take him as far as Bama can go here. And I just don't know. He's so inconsistent. And that's what Bama's really been here for almost 2 years. It's been consistently inconsistent. And Anthony, you brought up the penalties. That's been a problem for the Tide for a couple of years now. Even when Nick Saban was there in his last couple of years, they are so undisciplined, and it is really costing them. I mean, you give teams like Tennessee, extra downs and extra or their defense extra chances to get to you, they're going to take advantage of that. And you can only survive for so long.
Yeah. Also, I think you're right about Milroe. I also think that there's probably a lot of other quarterbacks that fit that description too, but the light is not shined on them as much as it is with Milroe. And right. In Milroe's case, is way more consequential. Like we were just talking about Carson Beck before, but because the team around, like his defense was so good and his team around him was so good, it didn't matter as much. But with Milroe, it's like Milroe's got to play well in order for Alabama to win. In order for Alabama to win, Milroe's got to play a good game. And that's obviously going to be a problem for Alabama. You were talking about how inconsistent Milroe is. Like he's shown like he's talented, but is inconsistent in everything. He almost reminds me a little bit of Cardale Jones in that sense. Cardale Jones won in 2014. He led Ohio State to the national championship game, to a national championship victory after just sneaking in as the 4-team right after JT Barrett got hurt. He was Ohio State's 3rd-string quarterback, and he was amazing in that stretch that he played. And then the next year, they benched him because he was so bad. That's sort of what it seems a little bit like with Milroe. Like he was so good last year, and this year he was good sort of in the beginning, and now he just isn't. He's just struggling. And Anthony, you were talking about Nico. I mean, the truth is, Nico Iamaleava didn't really look any better against Alabama than he did against anybody else. He didn't look any better. He hasn't gotten. It doesn't look like he's gotten better. Only late in the game, but he went 14 for 27 and threw 194 yards. Another game under 200 yards of passing for Nico. So he hasn't really looked much. He hasn't really looked any better. It's not even like he played an amazing game in Alabama, and there's nothing you could do about it. This game was winnable. This game was winnable for Alabama. And Dylan Sampson by himself had 139 rushing yards. By himself. Tennessee ran for over 200 yards against Alabama. They ran for over 200 yards. Imagine that happening a year ago. That just wouldn't have happened a year ago. It was Tennessee's run game that really just carried them. Nico didn't play a great game. The pass game was not good. Alabama just figured out a way to blow the game, basically. That's what happened. They figured out a way to blow the game. That final interception was brutal. It was brutal, but Alabama had no business losing that game. They just didn't.
Yeah, I'm not saying Nico's a good quarterback. I'm just saying Alabama's defense has been so atrocious that in the fourth quarter they made Nico look like a good quarterback. And when you guys speak about Jalen Milroe as an Alabama fan, I got NFL guys who are always asking me all the time, like, oh, where's this Alabama quarterback in the draft? And I feel like each week if you ask me, I'm going to have a different answer. One week I might say he's a first-round pick. The other week I might tell you he's a seventh-round pick. He's a real tough guy to evaluate. I think based on just his tools and his athletic ability and his arm strength, some GM or some team may take a shot at him late in the first round. But, he's definitely got some things to fix. But like Nick said, he does kind of have to play like Superman for Alabama to have a chance. Like even as a Buffalo Bills fan, it seems like I'm watching the Bills sometimes where it's like, just like Josh Allen, Melrose got to play perfect. And if not, Alabama doesn't have a chance.
Yeah. That's obviously the problem. That's the problem. And like I said, Nico didn't even play a great game. He didn't. I don't really know how to evaluate Alabama this year. I don't know. The point is, if they're a 10-win team, I think they're a playoff team because they'd have a win against Georgia. It would be difficult to leave them out, but they're also very much affected by the Big Ten teams and the ACC teams and the at-large bid and Notre Dame. I mean, to me, I could see there being like 13 teams who could potentially make it. I think I could, assuming it all goes a certain way. I could see a 10-2, obviously Georgia, obviously Texas, a 10-2 Alabama team, a 10-2 Tennessee team. Even though Tennessee hasn't looked great with the win against Bama, you can't put Bama in and not Tennessee.
Right.
Miami and Clemson, that's 6. 4 Big Ten teams, Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana. That's 10. Notre Dame, the winner of the Big 12 and the at-large bid, which I would say probably Boise State would be the at-large bid most likely, or whoever it is. That's 13 teams that potentially could make it. Where Alabama ranks on that, I don't know. If Penn State goes 11-1, they're definitely not leaving them out if their only losses to Ohio State. It'll also be difficult to do with Indiana if they go 11-1, or if Miami wins out and Clemson wins out, and whoever, it's just Alabama will be taking a back seat to a lot of those teams.
Yeah, the saving grace though for Bama, real quick, and we can move on here, is if they win out, they'll have wins against Missouri and LSU, which are both ranked teams right now too, which will help the resume out as well. So, but they have to win out, and right now the way they're looking, I don't know if they can win out.
Yeah, because every game is like a roller coaster.
Yeah,
every game it just looks like a roller coaster for them. Another team I do want to get to, Big Ten games. Maryland, USC blew this game against Maryland. They totally blew this game. I said a few weeks ago that week by week, it seems like USC gets worse and worse in terms of, not that they get worse and worse, but like they get exposed as worse. It's like everybody kind of sees the blemishes they have in their game. Like people see the offensive line or, how they can't stop the run and, some of the stupid mistakes they made. Let me just point out, Maryland did everything they could to blow this game. They did everything they could to blow this game. I mean, if you watch this game, it's like Maryland, I don't know if you remember at the end of the first half, they were at like the 30-yard line with 10 seconds left. They snap it in shotgun formation instead of maybe spiking it. And it's a bad snap. It goes to the side of Edwards, the quarterback, and USC recovers. So that's like that's probably like 3 points right there, at least that Maryland just threw away. The other was that terrible interception in the third quarter from Edwards, which was in the red zone, which was another thing that Maryland could have certainly capitalized on. So Maryland did everything to blow this game, and USC just did it for them. They just did it for them. The thing with USC is it looks like they're a 7-5 team. They're definitely out of the playoffs. I don't know how much of this game you guys watched.
Yeah, I just feel like each week USC's invented new ways to blow games. They keep having these fourth quarter collapses, and they got outscored 15-7 in the fourth quarter, and their offense really didn't do anything in the entire second half, only scoring 7 points. So it's another game where their offense looked good and their defense looked good in the first half, and then Miller Moss and the defense just collapsed. For some reason, in the fourth quarter, their defense just forgets to tackle. I'm not sure what's the issue there, but gotta give Maryland credit. They got some good players of their own. Ty Felton, the receiver. USC didn't have an answer for him late. Glendon Miller, the corner for Maryland. He was shut down all night. But this had more to do with what USC didn't do than what Maryland did. Like you said, Maryland should have lost this game 10 times out of 10, and USC just couldn't finish. And another tough loss again for Lincoln Riley. And I just don't understand how much emotions this team could go through. How many more emotional losses can this team have before this team just kind of gives up on the season and we just start seeing really bad blowout losses? This team keeps fighting hard, and then in the fourth quarter they just lose it all. So I'm not sure how much longer this locker room is going to be intact before they decide to just give up on the season and we start seeing players maybe enter in the transfer portal.
Here's all you need to know about USC. They have 4 losses this year, all 4 coming in the second half, and all by combined 14 points.
Yeah.
I mean, so it just goes to show you guys that said it. They just can't play a full 60 minutes of football. That's really what it is. And, as a Notre Dame fan, I was looking forward to that game at the end of the year because I thought it'd be very significant, maybe possibly playing a team that would have been a ranked team. Now it's, they're going to play them at the end of the year. And, who, like you said, who knows what they're going to even be like if they're going to have another deflating loss or two by the time we play them at the end of the season.
Well, I will say it would be the most Notre Dame and USC thing if Notre Dame were to just lose to USC at the end of the game. After USC is totally out of it. Like that I could totally see happening, especially with Lincoln Riley.
Like the way that we lost to them when we played them several years ago at Notre Dame with 3 seconds left in the fourth, and they do that little quarterback sneak at the very end with Matt Lauer and Reggie Bush. Oh, that game still gives me heartbreak, by the way.
Right. It would be like a very Notre Dame thing to start the season off terribly with a loss to Northern Illinois to being a clear playoff team to then ending the season again losing to USC.
And it's funny because, I know we'll get to them when we make their picks, but, I was looking at their schedule at the start of the year. At this point, I was thinking, well, we still have Florida State and we still have USC on the schedule. Those would be great resume builders. Now our resume builders are going to be Navy and Army.
Yeah.
It's quite, and that just goes to show you what this year has been like.
Yeah, imagine thinking Florida State's going to be a tough game.
Oh, my God. Well,
that is just so
a real favorable game. That before the season was going to be the game. But now it's just a game.
Yeah, and you were talking. I think you said it best. USC they don't play full games of football. By the way, it's not just the games they lost. You could also look at some of the games they won, like that game against Wisconsin when they basically took a nap the entire first half, and they turned around. They had a comeback, but it was a comeback against Wisconsin. They're on their backup quarterback.
Yeah,
they needed to come back in the second half in order to actually beat them. So they're basically a part-time team is how I would put it. They're a part-time team, USC.
If you were playing college football 25 on the video game system, just set that game to 30 minutes and then they'd be undefeated.
And what's the most iconic thing I want to say lastly about USC is their one best win was a comeback in the fourth quarter against LSU.
That's right.
It was LSU that collapsed at the end of that game, and USC came back. So for them to have that great win and then them be the ones collapsing in the fourth quarter of these games, I just don't understand, what's going wrong with this team.
Well, I think they're a young team. They're inexperienced, and they really just don't. Miller Moss is still young. Their offensive line isn't good. Their defensive line isn't good. They're a little bit like they're just sort of going through a growing pain, is how I would put it. Kind of like Texas 2 or 3 years ago, I think.
Yeah,
that's what I think USC is like, or Michigan 7 or 8 years ago. That's what they look like to me. I think this USC team is very similar. It reminds me, not necessarily in terms of the type of play that the games that they play, but like in terms of the story, is very similar to what Michigan was 7 years ago. Like it was Harbaugh's third year. They were losing games they were losing all the sort of difficult games they were playing. Although USC looks like they'll probably have 5 losses instead of 4. Michigan went 8-4 that year and lost the Outback Bowl to South Carolina. And people were talking about, is Harbaugh overrated, whatever. And obviously that turned out not to be true because they ended up winning a championship. And that argument narrative is not accurate anymore. So I think in the future, USC will be just fine. I really do. I think they will be just fine. It's just that this year is just not their year, is how I would put it. This year is not their year. You can't be playing games part-time.
No.
You can't be playing part-time football and expect to win games. It's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And by the way, that last play, Woody Marks has got to catch that. That last play.
Yeah.
That was just it was just rough. I mean, it's rough to lose a game on a blocked field goal, basically. Yeah. Another team going through growing pains, or if anything, a hangover from a championship. Illinois, they beat Michigan 21-7. Michigan are now 4-3. They still have to play Indiana and Ohio State. I could, off the top of my head, they are. It looks pretty bad for Michigan right now. Their quarterback play has just been terrible. Illinois, credit to Illinois though. Brett Bielema, I think, has done a great job with Illinois.
Yeah. By the way, Nick D, they have to play. They play Michigan State Saturday, and then they still have to play Oregon, Indiana, and
Oregon. I forgot about that.
Yeah, they still have to play Oregon the week after. So
So that's 3 probable losses right there.
Yeah, Oregon, Indiana, at Indiana, and at Ohio State to wrap up the year. So,
yeah, and so by the way, you know what that means? That means they're probably not even. It'll be tough for them to even make a bowl game.
I was going to say they might struggle to get to 6 wins.
Well, yeah, from the way they've been playing.
And they got to play Michigan State, and they got to play Northwestern as well.
Yeah, and I think Michigan's better than Michigan State, but like Michigan State plays Michigan tough. It still is a rivalry game. And a lot of years, Michigan loses to Michigan State when they really should be the better team. That often does happen.
I remember.
So you never know.
One playing that series.
Yeah, well, the one 9 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Michigan State tends to play them tough, and three of these games, Ohio State and Indiana on the road, and Oregon at home. The way Oregon's looked, like those feel like 3 automatic losses. Like for Michigan.
It feels like it's going to get worse before it gets better for Michigan. And one thing I also want to add too. Their best player, Will Johnson, may be out. He's dealing with an injury. That could be significant. In Michigan, I mean, all they have is their defense. Their offense doesn't do them any favors. They got one of the worst, if not the worst, quarterback situation in all the Power 4 conference teams. So it's going to be tough for Michigan just to get even bowl eligible. We were just talking about how disappointing USC is, but at least USC has kind of been competitive in a lot of these games, and I feel like USC will probably end up with less losses than Michigan. Michigan's probably going to be at that 5 or 6 loss mark, and what a tough way to fall from winning the national championship. But after losing Jim Harbaugh, it's expected. Maybe not this bad, but a drop-off had to be expected.
Well, not just losing Jim Harbaugh, but a whole bunch of your best players, including your quarterback. And J.J. McCarthy is often thought of as like a system quarterback. I don't think that's totally fair to him because look at how much worse Michigan is without him.
Right.
And yeah, they're just Yeah, they just lost so much from last year that they weren't able to fully recover from, and they're going to be losing more players to the draft this year too. So what are they going to look like next year?
They're going to lose
what's
their
the quarterback
defense
situation going to be next year? Who knows?
All their defensive players are going to the draft, so now we're going to see their defense have an overhaul next year.
Yeah.
They can't do what Georgia does. That's for sure. And then on the other side of things, Illinois, nice bounce back for them after struggling against Purdue the week prior, and now they're 6-1, and they've got a good test coming up against Oregon next week.
Yeah, well, the crazy thing is that they also won the game with their run game too. They ran all over Michigan, which imagine that happening last year. That would have been impossible to do. I mean, Michigan is not even good at what their supposed strengths are anymore. Mm-hmm. They're not even good at that. You take all they're usually good at the turnover margin. They win the line of scrimmage. They can't win the line of scrimmage. They can't win the turnover margin anymore. They can't play the same type of game that they were able to play just last year. Luke Altmaier, he threw for 80 yards the whole game. He went 9 for 18 and threw 80 yards.
Well, they're going,
and they won 21-7. Imagine doing that to Michigan last year. There's no way.
Yeah,
there's no way. So Michigan, they're just in a lot of trouble. They're just in a lot of trouble, not just this year, but next year too. I think they're in a lot of trouble. I mean, if I were a Michigan fan, my fear would be, are we going to go back into the oblivion that we were before Harbaugh? I think that's a real legitimate question to ask if you're a Michigan fan.
Yeah, with the conference getting stronger and deeper, that's also another thing they have to overcome too.
Yeah,
you used to only have to deal with Ohio State and maybe perhaps Penn State. Now you have a bunch of other ones to deal with too.
I mean, Penn State. I mean, this year you got Ohio State, which that's always been a problem for Michigan. Penn State, Indiana, Oregon. They're all way better than Michigan this year. Way better. And by the way, I never thought I'd live to see the day that Indiana is this good. They are like the best offense in the country. We have to talk about this. Indiana, they killed Nebraska 56-7. Curt Cignetti has to be the coach of the year. This is incredible what Indiana has been able to do this year. I think they have like the number 1 ranked offense in the country. Indiana. They are just so good this year. Curt Cignetti just deserves so much credit. A lot of his players are transfers from when he was the head coach at James Madison. But Indiana, they have a legitimate shot at the playoffs this year. A legitimate shot. The only team they really have to play that's going to be like really difficult, I think, is going to be Ohio State. They're of all the games they have left, they have Washington at home, Michigan State on the road, Michigan at home, Ohio State on the road, and Purdue at home. It would be the most Purdue thing, by the way, if they went 11-1. Purdue beats them in the last week of the season. That would be the most Purdue type of thing to happen. But there's a good chance they go 11-1. I think that their shot at the playoffs has a lot to do with style points. I think it does. Like if they blow out Washington and they blow out Michigan and Michigan State and Michigan and they lose by a little bit to Ohio State and they go 11-1, I think they have a shot at the playoffs. Maybe if Ohio State blows them out, it might be viewed a little differently because their schedule has been very favorable. But this team, I mean, we really can't overlook them anymore.
Yeah, Indiana has to be respected, and they're definitely legit. What's scary about them, Nick, is not only do they have one of the most prolific and high-scoring offenses in college football, their defense is really dominant as well. So they're doing it on both sides of the ball. I mean, Curtis Rourke, he's came in there, and he's got to be a Heisman candidate. He's been one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football this year. Ellison, the running back, has been unbelievable. Their trio of receivers has been unbelievable as well. Price and Surratt. So everything has been going good. Kamara, the edge rusher, he's one of the top guys in the country in terms of quarterback pressures. So like I said, guys, they're doing it on both sides of the ball. And I understand there's a lot of people out there saying, oh, they haven't played anybody. They haven't beat anybody good. But when you're blowing out a team like Nebraska, who I definitely think is good, they may not be ranked, but I think Nebraska is a quality team. For you to blow out that team 56-7, it definitely has to say something about you. And I think Indiana is a team that we definitely have to talk about being in the thick of things. It looks like they got at least a legitimate shot to go 11-1, and if they go 11-1, they're definitely going to be in the playoffs. And the only thing I'm worried about is Curtis Rourke, the quarterback, is dealing with a thumb injury. Now, he's probably not going to play this weekend. He may be back in 2 weeks. Now, that could be significant. He's been the heart and soul of this team, but if he comes back and he's healthy, this team's going to be tough to beat.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, they did say that he had thumb surgery, Curtis Rourke did. So he underwent surgery on his right thumb on Monday, but his prognosis has improved. That's what they're reporting this week. So there is optimism he could be back, not this week, but next week at Michigan State. But he's doubtful for this Saturday at home against Washington, which is going to be a noon kickoff, by the way. So Washington having to come cross country, play that early game.
Yeah, and Washington struggled a little bit. I mean, they lost to Rutgers. They've struggled since losing Michael Penix and joining the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, Washington. It's funny, the rematch. The two teams that were in the national championship, they're totally unrecognizable.
Crazy. Right? It's crazy how much that changed, and I think a lot of it has to do with the transfer portal.
It does. Yeah, I mean, that's we can go back to Alabama and stuff, and we can see talk about Saban why he got out of there. I mean, it's changed the sport. That's for sure.
I do want to move on to talk about Miami and Louisville. Miami always seems to get into shootouts, it seems like. From the way Miami's been playing, look, they've been, I would say, since they started playing in the ACC, they looked bad. They looked bad against Virginia Tech. They looked bad against Cal. And there's still a lot of red flags about them, which is that they always seem to give up a lot of points. Like they seem to just get into shootouts all the time. But this was probably their toughest matchup until they play Clemson in the ACC championship, most likely. If Miami wins out and they play Clemson in the ACC championship game, they're probably a playoff team. It would be really hard for the committee to justify leaving them out.
Yeah, Miami's been a really interesting team, and I understand they have their red flags and they've been playing a lot of close games. But after a while, now that it's been happening week in and week out, I'm starting to think it's more of a positive because I think it's showing that Miami just keeps figuring out a way to win games. Like, not saying that they're the Kansas City Chiefs or all, but they remind me of the Kansas City Chiefs where every game's close, but they're always finding a way to win. Cam Ward has got to be right there in the thick of things with Ashton Gentry for the Heisman Trophy. He's got to be probably the best quarterback in the country, one of the top guys in touchdown passes, and he's been carrying this team. But Xavier Restrepo, one of the top receivers in the country as well. But this defense is definitely going to have to play better. Definitely when they get a matchup against Clemson, if they do in the ACC championship game, their defense is going to have to play much better. I don't think they're going to be able to win in a shootout against Clemson's great defense and the way Clay Klubnik's playing. But we got to give Miami credit. And what about Louisville? They didn't give up. Colin Lacey with that great kick return touchdown. And then, that fumble. Louisville gave Miami everything they had. Tyler Shunk tried to, win this game by shootout, but it's going to be hard to beat Cam Ward in a shootout because he's just that good.
Yeah, I would say this. I think Cam Ward is the most impactful transfer portal player in college football this season. If you look at it, I mean, you saw Miami with Mario Cristobal was struggling big time there with Miami last year. We saw Tyler Van Dyke. He was getting benched. He was getting hurt. They bring in Cam Ward, and I'll tell you what. I mean, to me, he's right up there for Heisman Trophy. If you look at his numbers this year, he's got 24 touchdowns. Which is almost as many as he threw all of last year. I mean, so that's why I think he's been the most impactful transfer portal player we've seen in CFB in CF so far.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Cam Ward has been very impactful, and they're very reliant on it. He throws the ball a lot. Miami is very reliant on him. I totally agree. There's lots of red flags about Miami for sure, but they still figure out a way to win. And like I said, I mean, ultimately, here's the rest of their schedule. The rest of their schedule, their toughest game is against Duke. And they'll be double-digit favorites against Duke. I mean, like, if they're going to be double-digit favorites for the rest of the season. So even if, with all of that, all of our talking about, all their red flags, they don't have to play great against against any of these teams in order to win. And Cam Ward can play like he did in the first three quarters against Cal, and they can still win. And as long as they win those games, and they make it to the ACC championship game, even if they lose to Clemson, they're still a playoff team. And if they beat Clemson, well, great. Then they get like a first round bye. It's even better. So, things right now I think look pretty good for Miami. Iowa State and BYU both almost lost. The Big 12 this year is wide open, I'd say. Both, I think you were saying, Anthony, both these games were like really oddly similar.
Yeah, it felt like I was watching the same game. I mean, we had two teams win 38-35. Both teams were about to lose. Both quarterbacks for both teams, Jack Ratzloff and Rico Beck, were both struggling, and then go down the field in a late game drive to score to take the game-winning touchdown. I mean, this was absolutely a great game. For Iowa State to win over UCF and for BYU to win over Oklahoma State, both in shootouts. I mean, it goes to show you how crazy the Big 12 is. And what's even more insane is, had both these teams lost, Colorado would have been right there, almost in first place. That's how crazy the Big 12 has been. But now that both these teams stay undefeated, obviously these are the top two teams to beat. But the Big 12 is still anyone's game. I really don't know who's going to be the team. I thought it was BYU. Now I really don't know. Maybe it's Kansas State. I don't know who to pick. BYU did beat Kansas State, but maybe it's Iowa State. I don't know how to give this conference.
Yeah, Anthony, I think this is the toughest conference to figure out. You said it. And, because both of these schools struggled and had a rally to come back. And I know Iowa State is 7-0, but, I mean, it's tough to figure out. I mean, they won a game despite the fact that their quarterback only completed 43% of his passes last week. So I don't know if they're going to be able to keep it up. I have to look at their schedule, too. That might help, too. But crazy games, and it was an unbelievable weekend, and these two schools proved it again.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's just a tough conference to figure out. Nobody, like, the winner of it is in, even though, like, the conference is pretty weak this year. Like the Big 12 is a pretty weak conference, so there seems to be a lot of parity because their two best teams left, Oklahoma and Texas, it's really just winner is. Ultimately, it's wide open. Winner is in the playoff. That's really as simple as it is.
Yeah. If I had to take a guess, if I had to go out on a limb and pick somebody, I would pick BYU, but I would be very hesitant to do so.
I would probably go with Iowa State.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those two. I mean, they haven't given up that many points this year, neither of them. I mean, Iowa State's only allowed 101 in 7 games, which is, pretty impressive, especially for college football. And I think you've seen that. I think these defenses in college have actually improved. And I think that's why we've seen some of the quarterback play struggle, especially when you get to the ACC. For sure.
So on DraftKings, the most likely winner is Iowa State at plus 160. Next is Kansas State at plus 230, and then BYU at plus 380.
Interesting.
And then at 4 is Colorado at plus 1,200, which is way, way down.
Yeah.
And that's crazy because BYU absolutely destroyed Kansas State.
Yeah, they did. I mean, Kansas State, that's a whole nother thing. That's another tough team to figure out. I do want to get to some picks for the weekend. LSU at Texas A&M, big SEC matchup. LSU at Texas A&M -3. Texas A&M is giving 3. I like LSU this game. I like LSU +3, which is basically picking them to win outright. I think LSU has really surged since losing to USC. By the way, I do want to point out, and this is not an uncommon thing in college football, how much everybody was praising USC after they beat LSU, and people were like, "Oh, LSU is done," which everybody wants to say after week 1, because LSU always loses those games. It seems like, but then they come back, just like 2 years ago, actually, when they lost to Florida State in week 1 on a Sunday night. I think LSU is pretty good. LSU is a pretty good team this year. I think Garrett Nussmeier is having a good year. I think LSU is going to pull this off.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see this matchup stylistically. LSU has one of the best offensive lines in the country. Will Campbell is going to be a top 5, maybe top 3 pick in the NFL draft. And Texas A&M's got some dogs on the defensive line.
Yeah.
They got Nick Sortson, who's unbelievable. He may be a top 10 pick as well. You got Shamar Stewart as well. So to see those two guys on the edges going up against LSU's offensive line is going to be really the matchup I'm going to be most looking forward to. I'm going to go LSU to win this game as well. And the reason being is because the difference in the quarterbacks. I know LSU's defense can be hit or miss, and Texas A&M's defense probably has been better. But I think Garrett Nussmeier is a much better quarterback than Connor Wegman. Since he's come back, I haven't really trusted Connor Wegman. And Garrett Nussmeier has really put this offense on his back. And I feel like he's made a lot of crucial plays that helped his team win. Particularly, we've seen what he did at the end of the game against Ole Miss. And I think Garrett Nussmeier has been one of the top players in the country. And I think the difference in the quarterback play will be the difference in this one. So I'm going to go LSU.
Yeah, better quarterback, better head coach, I would say.
Yeah, this is actually a tough one because, College Station's a very tough place to play. I know we went down there. We won there to start the year. And an interesting fact in this one, the home team has won won 7 straight in this series. But I think that's going to get snapped here. Anthony, I think you said it best. To me, this game comes down to up front. The LSU offensive line has been very, very good. The defense for A&M is also very, very good. But I also don't mind this LSU defense too. They've got some players as well. So I think the streak gets snapped here. I agree with you guys. I'm going to take LSU plus the 3 to get a rare road win in this series.
Yeah. All right. Number 21, Missouri at Alabama. Wow. Weird to see 15 next to Alabama.
Yeah, it's funny how they could drop only 6 spots when they lose to Vanderbilt, but then they lose to Tennessee and they drop 8.
Yeah, I know. You
said it at the start of the episode how the rankings sometimes the rankings are kind of strange, especially early on.
Well, also these are AP rankings; they don't mean anything.
CFP rankings, the first ones come out in about 2 weeks' time.
I think in 1 week. I could be wrong.
November 5th is the first
actually,
one.
you're right. 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Yeah.
In 2 weeks, the CFP, and they wait for a reason because you can't really evaluate teams very well. I mean, the thing with the AP rankings is it doesn't really matter if they get it right or not. So there's no incentive structure for them to really think it through and have it make logical sense. It doesn't really matter that much, which is why ultimately. I mean, Missouri's ranked now. If they lose to Alabama, there's a good chance they won't be ranked next week. And people are in this game, and this win won't mean anything for Alabama. I'll say I love Alabama. Minus 13.5. I like them to win by 2 touchdowns or more. They're playing at home. That's one good thing for Alabama. They're playing Missouri, which, even though Tennessee hasn't looked great, Missouri has not looked good at all. I always thought they were an overrated team. Before I was talking about how Alabama needs everything to be kind of right for them to win games. I think against Missouri, that sort of fits that description. They're playing at home. They're playing a weaker team than they were playing before. I mean, in fairness, they also struggled against South Carolina and Vanderbilt, but I do think they're going to be able to get it together this game, and they should be able to cover this spread against Missouri because Missouri is not good.
Yeah, I could definitely see this being a shootout. So whatever the over/under is, I would say take the over because I think these are both 2 defenses that have been struggling to stop the opposing teams. I'm going to go Alabama too to win and cover. I don't really trust Missouri at all. Obviously, I said they struggle on defense, but you got Brady Cook who's dealing with an ankle injury. I know he was played superhero and was able to get that win last week against Auburn, but I don't trust their team. I do like Luther Burden. He does scare me defensively. He's one of the best receivers in all college football. So Alabama with their young corners are going to have a tough time stopping them, which is why I think Missouri will put up points in this game. But Alabama is going to bounce back. Now that they have 2 losses, they know that, every game now from this point forward is essentially a playoff game. And now they're being at home. They're going to really show out. Melrose going to have a big game. So I got Alabama to win and cover.
I wonder how many posts we've seen that you've seen mentioned about, Nick Saban wouldn't have lost this game against Vanderbilt, or they wouldn't have played it bad against South Carolina.
Nick Saban must be stroking his ego right now.
Oh, listen, he's got it made at game day. I mean, he's thrilled. But I'll tell you what, and I bring that up only because when Nick Saban was there, the one thing you never wanted to do was play Alabama off of a loss and at home and at Bryant-Denny Stadium. And I love the fact that this number is now under 2 touchdowns. So I am going to take Alabama. I'm going to take the Tide minus the 13.5 here. because also, while I have concerns for Alabama going forward here, Missouri to me is fading, guys. I mean, they had a rally just to beat Vanderbilt and Auburn at home. So, and they were really exposed at Texas against Texas A&M here. So I think they're falling. I know Bama's struggling here, but I think even if they get a 2-touchdown win, you know what, that's good enough for all of us. So yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to take the Tide here minus the 13.5 to at least win it comfortably for 1 week here at Bryant-Denny.
All right. Texas minus 19 at Vanderbilt. I'm sort of torn on this because part of me feels like this is a get-right game for Texas, but they're also going on the road against Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt's actually been sneaky tough this year. They've been sneaky kind of tough. I feel like 19 points on the road is a little too much. So I'll go with Vanderbilt to at least cover 19. I still think Texas will win by 2 touchdowns or more, but I don't think they're going to cover 19.
Yeah, I was really on the Vanderbilt hype train real early. I've been a fan of Diego Pavia since the beginning, since he transferred in. But I just feel like Texas, after getting embarrassed in front of the entire country, this is a perfect time for them to come back and bounce back. I think defensively they're going to have something to prove. And, Vanderbilt, everything's just kind of gone right for them. So they have a lot of momentum, but I feel like this is just a perfect game for them to kind of just get shut out and for a perfect game for Texas to shut them out. So I'm going to go Texas to blow them out and cover.
All right.
Think about this from a Vanderbilt perspective. They got Bama post Georgia. This is from one of my guys that I like, JD Pickout from the On3, put this out. So Vanderbilt got Bama post Georgia. They get Texas post Georgia, and they're going to get Tennessee 14 days after Georgia. After Georgia. That all being said, so that basically would tell you, and like I said earlier, how you don't want to play Alabama off a loss. I don't think you want to be playing Texas off of a loss. And I don't buy the fact that Texas is in a dangerous spot here traveling to Nashville, because to me the Longhorns are better built than say Bama was when they played. Texas still leads the nation in scoring and total defense, and they've also won 8 straight games on the road here. I know that's a big number, and I get that Diego Pavia has been fantastic, Pavia Mavia, something like that, Mania, but I want to see them do it again here, so I'm going to lay the 19 points and take Texas to bounce back here on the road.
All right.
A little bit of a hesitant. I don't know if this is a game that if I had money, I would bet this game. It's a little too much, but I'm going to say that Texas gets a 3-touchdown win here.
All right.
On the road.
20th ranked Illinois at number 1 ranked Oregon. Oregon's giving 21. Oregon's been killing it. I like them to cover the 3-touchdown spread against Illinois. Even though Illinois is a good team, Eugene, Oregon is a very tough place to play. It is a tough place to play. And they're the number 1 team in the country for a reason. I like them to blow them out.
Yeah, I like Oregon to win, but I got Oregon no cover. I think Oregon, they have to be the number 1 team. Derek Harmon, their defensive tackle, leads all the country in quarterback pressures at the defensive tackle position. So that's unbelievable, him doing it, getting double and triple teamed. Evan Stewart has been a great deep threat for this Oregon team. Dylan Gabriel, Heisman candidate as well. But I just feel like after Oregon having that win against Ohio State, I feel like there is times, we saw this at the beginning of the year, where sometimes Oregon plays down to their competition. I feel like now that they played their toughest game on their schedule, they may start looking towards the playoffs. Not saying they're going to lose or anything. I still think they win this game by 2 touchdowns, but I don't think they're going to cover. Illinois is too good. They got a lot of good players on the defense. And I don't like Luke Altmaier too much. I think he's probably going to have a bad game. But defensively, they'll be good enough. They got 2 good receivers as well for Illinois. So I got Oregon no cover.
So here's an interesting nugget. So Oregon's only won 2 games this year. Well, technically, now that this number is 21, it's been 3 games at or above this line. And if you look at the Illini, you know what, their nickname, they're Fighting Illini, I think it's appropriate because they can compete in a variety of ways. I know this is a tough test going to Oregon here, but they also are one of the more successful teams against the spread. They're actually 5-1-1 this season against the spread. Even if they get a backdoor cover in the fourth quarter, I could see that. So I'm going to go with Anthony here. I'm going to take them plus 21. But I still think Oregon wins this game for sure.
Yeah. Penn State -6.5 at Wisconsin. I love Penn State this game. I think Penn State's going to kill them. Wisconsin is not good at all. Penn State is one of the best teams in the country. I think Penn State easily covers the spread.
Yeah, I got Penn State easily covering as well. I wouldn't say Wisconsin's a bad team. They've actually been playing pretty good football of late. Their running game, led by Tayway Waller, their running game has been really good. They got 3 good running backs. Their defense has been pretty solid, particularly in the secondary. So I wouldn't say that they're a bad team. They're not a great team. Penn State is a great team. With all those players they have on defense, I think this is going to be 2 teams with great running attacks. So look to see a lot of running plays in this game, but Penn State's too good, so Penn State to cover.
Are you two guys worried about them possibly looking ahead to Ohio State next week?
They're playing. Maybe. I guess that could be a little bit.
I got to tell you though, Wisconsin's a very interesting story this year because they got off to they lost Tyler Van Dyke at the start of the year against Alabama. They had one of their players walk off, but they coughed up a big lead to USC, like we mentioned earlier at the start of the show. But Luke Fickell's squad the last 3 weeks, I know it's not been against the best competition in the world, but they were outscoring their opponents by more than 100 points. And Penn State offensively, they're missing, I think they're very thin at receiver. I got to tell you, I think Wisconsin keeps this game close. I think Penn State wins, but I'm going to take Wisconsin plus the 6.5 here. And I think the Nittany Lions might be looking a little bit ahead to Ohio State next week. And I think Wisconsin, tough place to play. I think they keep it close, but I think Penn State does win the game.
Yep. Well, they killed Purdue. I guess everybody does that.
Who doesn't?
they also beat Rutgers 42-7. Rutgers is no slouch this year, and they beat Northwestern 23-3.
Yeah.
So they haven't been all that bad, and USC needed to come back to beat them, and their first loss was to Alabama. So yeah, their resume is really not all that bad, Wisconsin, this year.
Yeah, this might be a timing game too. If this was at the start of the year, I think this is a totally different story. And Penn State's down is kind of thin at receiver too. So
yeah, that's true. But their run game is very good. They have a great run game,
and that'll help them in this game. And I think that is why they will win. But I think it's going to be a lot closer than the think.
Notre Dame, your Notre Dame at Navy. I love the thing with Notre Dame is that every week that loss to Northern Illinois makes less and less sense. Because Notre Dame's been really, really good since that loss. And if they lose again, it's not going to be again until USC, because it would be the most Notre Dame thing to start off the season terrible, finally come back, and then lose it all in a game against USC. Like that would happen, I think. But I love Notre Dame to cover. Notre Dame is very, very good. I don't think Navy is much of a match for them. I'm going with Notre Dame.
Yeah, just to let you know, it is a neutral site game. So Navy's not the home team. It's going to be at MetLife. But Navy's not the normal Navy team that you're used to seeing. You're used to seeing a Navy team that just runs the ball a million times on you. That's not Navy this year. They got Blake Horvath, who has been a really good quarterback from the pocket, throwing the ball downfield. Obviously, Navy also has a good defense. I think Notre Dame, Benjamin Morris, that's a huge loss at corner for Notre Dame. He's probably been their best defensive player. He's going to be a first-round pick. Shutdown corner pretty much takes half the field, all for the offense. So that's a tough loss. I do think Notre Dame will win, but I got no cover in this one. Navy's just too good. Their quarterback's too good. Their defense too good. I think their defense is going to try to force quarterback Riley Leonard to throw the ball downfield. He hasn't been able to do that too well this season. He's been relying more on his legs. And their running back, Jeremiah Love, has been phenomenal as well. So I think their running game will prevail in this one, but I got Notre Dame no cover.
Anthony, you and I are sharing a brain again. I love Navy to cover this at least because, one of the things with these two teams, so Notre Dame's they're gettable on the ground, and Service Academy teams love to run it, and Notre Dame likes to run it too. And I think one thing that might lead to in this one is fewer possessions, and that ultimately helps a game keep it close. Also, a game against the Service Academy, is it ever going to be really more than 13 points? It always feels like they're closer. It also feels like they're lower scoring, even though that the overs for both of these teams have also hit a lot for both of them. But also looking at a trend here when I was looking this up, do you realize as an underdog in the last 18 games, Navy's 12-5-1 against the spread as an underdog in the last 18 games. I just feel like, and you said it too, the secondary is a big blow for Notre Dame here with that injury. And I think they are going to get a touchdown win, but I think Navy's going to make it a lot tougher for them. So Notre Dame will win, and they you know what, they have to win. I mean, it's funny how I told you guys before we started here. At this point of the year, I was looking ahead to Florida State. At this point when we started the year, looking at this point, I was looking ahead to Florida State and USC as being the games. Well, now the games are Navy and Army, which are both going to be neutral site games, and I think it also helps the Irish too. So I think Navy keeps it inside of this number. I think the Irish do sneak out with a win, but it's going to be a very, very close one.
All right. So we finally end the show with another edition of Unnecessary Wagers. So here's my unnecessary wager of the week, which will definitely not hit. It hasn't hit once throughout all the shows I've done. All right. So Kentucky -2.5 at home against Auburn. That feels kind of easy. Auburn is just a dumpster fire this year. Over 30.5 points for Alabama against Missouri, the team over. Under 37.5 for the Northwestern Iowa game. Northwestern Iowa, that just screams under low-scoring games. The final score is going to be like 14-3 or something like that. Penn State money line against Wisconsin. LSU plus 0.5 first half spread. So even if they're tied at the first half, I win that bet. Kansas State -10 against Kansas. Kansas State is sneaky good this year, and they do have a legitimate shot to win the Big 12. Kansas has fallen off. Kansas has totally fallen off. Miami -11.5 first half points against Florida State. Florida State's really, really bad. We don't even need to talk about Florida State anymore. Like we stopped talking about them because they're so bad. They lost relevance. I think Miami's really going to be up for this game too. They want revenge. Indiana -6.5 against Washington. We were just talking about how good Indiana is. They now play like a high-powered offense, and I think they're playing at home. I really love Indiana. And Nebraska +25.5 against Ohio State. All a parlay.
Nice.
All right. So that's our show today. Thanks for listening, everybody. This is Forever Power 5. You can follow me on Twitter at Nick DiMart, Johnny at Montalbano, NY, Anthony at Balester 555. This is Empty the Bench Network. You can follow at ETB Network on Twitter and Instagram, and Empty the Bench Network on Facebook. That's our show today. We'll be back next week. Thanks for watching and listening, everybody.
See ya.